Thank you. Good afternoon, members, officers, and welcome to this Planning Committee meeting on Wednesday, the 16th of December 2020. As usual, I will read through the names that I have on my list. There is a couple of changes of our committee since we last met. Again, I am aware there is an apology, which I will come to under that agenda item. So if I can go through your names, and I can see most people are here, but if you could answer me, please. Councillor Coleman Cook.
Here, Chair.
Councillor Steve Alban.
Yeah, here, Chair.
Councillor Joel Bayford.
Here, Chair.
Councillor Alan Curry.
Here, Chair.
Councillor John Dennis. Councillor Pat Moore. No. Councillor Becky Wing.
Here, Chair. I'm sub for Mike.
Yes, thank you, Becky. Councillor David Hart.
Here, Chair.
Councillor Heather Keane.
Here, Chair.
Councillor Paul Moore.
Here, Chair.
Councillor Matthew Scott, I believe, is going to be a little bit late because of his work. I'll come back to that. Councillor Gary Taylor. I think Gary is the same with his post office role. Councillor Linda Wright.
Here, Chair.
And myself, obviously, I'm here. Thank you. Right, as usual, a few notes for yourselves. If you have technical difficulties during a meeting, then please contact Democratic Services, which is James today on 577200, and it will be included in the chat box on your right-hand side for your convenience. I would ask participants to mute their microphones when you are not speaking. This minimises background noise and will help everyone who is listening to the proceedings. Microphones must only be on for the participant to speak when they've got permission. To gain permission to speak, please just note in the chat box or use the hand which is on our screens, and I think we all know how to use that now. Once you have finished speaking, please turn your microphones to mute. But everybody present, please ensure that their mobile phones are turned to silent and that they are not used to make or receive phone calls whilst the meeting is in progress. Please also refrain from checking emails and conducting other business, and ensure that you are in a quiet room free from distractions for the duration of this meeting. I will remind you that this meeting is being live streamed for members of the public to watch if they wish, and following the meeting, the recording will be available on the Council's YouTube channel. Members requesting to speak under 20.1. Do we have any members who I can't see who are online who wish to speak on any item? Okay, thank you. So agenda item 1, apologies for absence. As we mentioned, I do have apologies from Councillor Garner, who is substituted today by Councillor Wing. I've also received apologies from Councillor John Dennis. Are there any other apologies? No, okay, thank you. Agenda item 2, are there any declarations of interest? Nope. Agenda item 3, approving the minutes. Do members agree that the minutes of the Planning Committee meeting held on the 18th of November be approved and signed by the chairman? Can I have a proposer, please?
I'll propose that, Chair, Councillor Alban.
Councillor Alban, thank you. A seconder, please.
I'll second that, Chair. Councillor Coleman Cook.
Thank you, Councillor Coleman Cook. Do members agree?
Agreed.
Okay, thank you. Agree. Yep. I won't go through names on there again. Thank you. Agenda item 4, schedule of planning applications and public speaking. Once again, members, I'm sure you're aware of this, we still, and looking at the future, sadly, we cannot have site visits because of the COVID regulations. The following application has been reserved for public speaking, and that is agenda item 4A, which is 21 Belmont Road, Ramsgate. So moving on to that, agenda item 4A, as I've mentioned the address, I will ask the officer now to read out a public speaking statement who is in favour of this application. Suki, if you wouldn't mind, please.
Thank you, Chair. The most important consideration to take into account is the fact that planning consent is only required for this change of use as a result of the Council's imposition of an Article 4 direction, which has removed the right to change the use of a property in Thanet from a single dwelling to a small HMO for occupation by up to 6 persons. As with all government legislation, including all amendments to permitted development rights, the government undertook an impact assessment to determine whether it was desirable, appropriate and acceptable to introduce this particular permitted development right. Its decision to do so therefore confirms that it is the government's view that the change of use of a property from a single dwelling to a small HMO for occupation by up to 6 persons, regardless of the type or location of property, would not have such an impact upon the local area as to justify requiring planning consent. The primary aim of the Council's Article 4 direction was therefore to address the issue of concentration, whereby the uncontrolled proliferation of small HMOs, particularly in areas of pre-existing intensity, would be likely to adversely affect the character and residential amenity of an area, which had previously been recognised in the case of part of Cliftonville, which contributed to the formulation and adoption of the Cliftonville Development Plan and the subsequent adopted policy in the current local plan to prevent the further increase in the number of HMOs in both the Cliftonville West and Margate Central wards. It is therefore considered that far greater weight should be given to the matter of concentration of HMOs rather than upon perceived impact upon an area by a single small HMO, when government has concluded that such a use should not, by virtue of its limited scale, be likely to create unacceptable amenity or highway-related effects. Notwithstanding this point, officers have concluded that in this instance, the proposed scale of the proposal, namely occupation by 4 unrelated adults, would be little different to occupation of the property by 2 parents and 2 children in terms of noise, disturbance, refuge storage needs, and vehicle ownership, especially if the children were aged 17 or over, and given the lesser likelihood of vehicle ownership by the intended occupiers of the HMO. Indeed, planning inspectors have consistently found, in determining appeals, that there is no reason to assume that occupiers of an HMO are more likely to be responsible for antisocial behaviour. The applicant therefore commends the officer report and recommendation to members, who are respectfully asked to give favourable consideration to this application.
Thank you very much, Suki. I will ask our planning officer, which I believe is Ian this afternoon, if you would read out the report, please.
Thank you, Chairman. I will just present my screen. There we go. Okay, so the application site is outlined in red on the screen. So the application here, as mentioned in the statement, is to change the use of this dwelling, which is under the use class C3, to use class C4, which as stated covers small HMOs between 3 to 6 unrelated people. I don't necessarily have anything to add with regards to the history of why it needs planning permission over and above the statement, which provided a summary. But because the application does require planning permission by virtue of the Article 4 direction that the council placed on the urban area with regards to HMOs, it falls to consider this application against the statutory development plan. And in this instance, that's policy HO 19, which talks about HMOs, which is outlined in the report. So just looking at the site on the slide, so it's on this property is on Belmont Road. It's a terrace property within a row of two-storey terrace dwellings. Belmont Road in Ramsgate is this road here, so it's just behind Asda. Then you've also got Chatham Street here. We've got actually the site that members looked at not too long ago, just the north of Belmont Road here. And obviously the town centre is just off here with the swimming pool over here in Ramsgate. So this is the property in question. So it's a two-storey property, but you can see there's actually a basement level there as well, which forms part of the accommodation. In terms of going through the main issues, so as I mentioned, policy H019, the considerations within that are fourfold. So one is the consideration of whether or not an HMO would have an unacceptable impact on neighbouring properties. The second point is whether or not there is an intensification or concentration of that type of use in the area to cause a detriment to the character of the area. Then there's a consideration with regards to car parking, and then a consideration with regards to storage and waste collection. So as mentioned, that policy applies to all HMOs. So it does apply to C4 HMOs when planning permission is required, as well as HMOs up to more than 10 people. That's the policy test that's considered. So in terms of the actual proposal itself, so this is the existing layout of the property. So you can see the basement here, which has got the window at the front. Then you've got the actual layout itself at the moment, which is a lounge and dining room with a kitchen at the rear. And then it's got 3 bedrooms upstairs with a bathroom as well. And there's also a shower room on the ground floor. So the proposal as it originally came in was for an HMO up to 6 unrelated people, but it's been considered a couple of times by officers and subsequently amended on 2 occasions down to 5 people, and then subsequently upon further consideration down to 4 people. So the proposal is to change the use to an HMO for 4 unrelated people, and there is a proposed condition on any approval which would restrict it to 4 people. So you can see the layout as proposed here. So you have a bedroom at the front of the property, so the ground floor is in the middle here, the middle plan. You've got the bedrooms at the front, and then sort of to the back next to the staircase, and then with a living room, shower room at the rear. And then on the first floor, you have a bedroom at the front, and again, a bedroom, so mirroring what's on the ground floor, with then 2 separate bathrooms at the rear. And then there's a kitchen and dining room area on the basement level. Again, you saw from the photo the fact that there is a sort of a basement area within the property with the light being provided at the front. So in terms of going back to the location of the site, it is considered that the site is sustainable in terms of its location for both residential occupancy at the moment, but also with the proposal. It's within walking distance of very good bus links, very close distance from the town centre and facilities, and not too far away from Ramsgate Station as well. In terms of those tests of the HMO, in terms of unacceptable impact on living conditions of neighbouring occupiers, as the proposal has been restricted to 4 individuals, it's not considered to be a significant number of people over and above what a house of this scale would normally have as a residential dwelling. Doesn't increase overly the comings and goings in this street, particularly in comparison. Because you've got terrace properties that are quite tight, so there's already quite a bit of comings and goings, and it doesn't increase that. And there's no evidence to demonstrate that this use, these 4 people, would cause more noise than a C3 dwelling house. And indeed, this is a point that picked up by the supportive statement, but that does indeed hold in appeal decisions that it's not. There's no demonstrable evidence to suggest that these occupants would make more more noise than those in a normal dwelling house. In terms of the second point about concentration, so there are no licensed HMOs in this road. The housing team, the private sector housing team, have given a comment which is in the report, which confirms that when a license is required, so that's for 5 people or more, they would have a log of where those licenses are, and in this instance there aren't any in Belmont Road. From looking through the planning history of properties on Belmont Road, since the Article 4 direction came in, we've had no applications for any properties in Belmont Road to change their use to a C4 HMO. And so there's no evidence that there's concentration of this type of accommodation to change the character of the area within Belmont Road. In terms of highways, there is on-street parking on Belmont Road, but it is heavily parked up as a road at the moment. You can actually see it in the image that's there, which is the satellite image from Google. So it's unrestricted at the moment. However, the site is, as mentioned, it's highly sustainable. It's within walking distance of the town centre, and there is no justification that 4 people in a property would result in severe harm to highway safety or indeed parking amenity over and above the existing lawful use with 3 bedrooms. And whilst there are clearly parking pressures in the area, this change of use would not result in a material effect on the living conditions of residents by virtue of the change over and above what it currently is. And with regards to the 4th criteria, which is about storage and waste collections, again, it is predominantly almost the same as existing. They are terrace properties, so it does require bin storage at the rear of the property that then runs through the house, but it's no different from any of the other residential properties on the road. So in conclusion, the development is considered to be in accordance with policy HO 19 of the Thanet local plan, and then subject to conditions, including the restriction to no more than 4 people. The application is recommended for approval.
Thank you, Ian. I move that the officer's recommendation is adopted. Could the Vice Chair please second?
I'll second that, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Coleman Cook. I have a few speakers here, and thank you, Councillor Taylor, for coming along. I know you're busy. Councillor Paul Moore, please.
Thank you, Chair. Unfortunately, my question has been answered by Mr. Livingston, and that was in as much as he's stated that there will be a condition to limit to 4 on the application. So my query has already been answered. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Alban.
Yes, thank you, Chair. These are always difficult, Chair, these type of applications in relation to multiple occupancies. It's obviously clear that small residential units like this, which have a small HMO use, are required. However, the balance of that is to what the effect would be on surrounding areas. On surrounding properties. Could I just ask Mr. Livingston first, is the property empty at the present time?
Thank you, Chair. I'm afraid to say I don't have that information. I'm afraid I don't know if it is vacant or not. Whilst other questions are going on, I can see if there's anything in the application form to indicate whether or not it is or not. But I'm afraid I don't know. I'm afraid.
Okay, thank you. As Mr. Livingston has said, there isn't any other licensed multiple occupancies in Belmont Road. And we've had no applications within Belmont Road for multiple occupancies. However, we don't know if there's any unauthorised multiple occupancies in Belmont Road. Also, with effectively 4 separate households within a small property could result in many visitors to the property, especially if they are younger people who will be living there. And that concerns me somewhat in relation to the adjoining properties. I see there were a number of objections to this application by local residents in the report, and I have to say that at the present time I'm a bit unbalanced as to where I go with this, Chair. I do get what the officer's report says, that we should go with this as an approval, but I do have reservations. So before I decide what I'm going to do, I want to listen to what other members have to say. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Orban. Councillor Keane.
Thank you. I've got a couple of questions. I know you've said that there are no other HMOs in the road, but if this was agreed, does it set a precedent? I mean, how do you decide when there's too many HMOs, when there's too high a concentration? That was my first question. And my second was, you say about it just being limited to 4 people, but couldn't the rooms be occupied by couples, and then would they have to leave 2 rooms empty? And who checks up on how many people are actually living there? Those are my questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Ian, can you answer those, please?
Yeah, I can come back on those. So in terms of the point to do with concentration, so within policy HO19, there is criteria which talks about the number within a particular area, which would define whether or not the character is sort of changing into more predominantly this type of accommodation. So in this instance, it would, by granting permission, it wouldn't set a precedent, but obviously it would start almost the assessment of how many, could this road or this area take, and obviously this one would be one that would be logged as one that's already in place and there, and therefore it would almost restrict the number that could appear by virtue of being present. In terms of the restriction on the numbers, the condition, which is number 3 in the recommendation, is effectively stating that no more than 4 persons can occupy the property as their principal and main residence. Now, obviously, that means effectively that they are living at the property. In terms of checking that, it's not something that's periodically monitored when it comes to planning conditions like this. However, obviously, if a complaint was raised because residents were concerned in the area that there were more people living than allowed, then obviously it is something that we would investigate. There is the added element that if 5 people were to occupy it, as well as being in a breach of a planning condition, it would actually mean that an HMO license would be required for the property as well. So they'd need a license from private sector housing. So there are a couple of different ramifications if actually that condition is breached. So it is something that we would follow up. And again, the fact that obviously it is, in our view, it's a determinative issue to put the condition on. We've asked for the amendments to reduce it down to ensure that the impact is akin to a residential dwelling house in this area by restricting it to 4 people. And obviously, if that is breached, I'm sure, given the number of objections, that we would certainly hear about it, and we would certainly, it's considered to be in the public interest for us to follow that up by virtue of, we wouldn't have put the condition on otherwise.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ian. Councillor Jill Bayford.
Thank you, Chair. I do understand the concerns relating to HMOs, but having listened to the officer's report and considering the location, the proximity to public transport, the conditions, I feel really that there is no potential harm in this application, and I think I probably would like to support this application. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Bayford. Councillor Wing, welcome.
Thank you. I do actually know the area quite well, and I can understand that we've got a desperate need for single persons properties across the whole of Thanet.
But I've got to share a lot of the concerns that other people have got. You've got four people in the room, but you can't stop other visitors, and we could end up with couples, so there could be 8 at the property. There are already issues with parking. There's already issues with waste. You can see the recycling bin is actually at the front of the property. Are they going to share a recycling bin, or are we going to have four sets of recycling bins and 4 sets of waste bins? I also think we need to look at some of these things in a Ramsgate-wide context, because I believe we are probably the most densely populated town in Thanet, and we really need to review what we're stuffing in a very small area. I was once quoted 95% of Ramsgate has already been built on. I'm not sure whether that's correct. I also have concerns that it will trigger other applications in for HMOs, and I believe there are already some unofficial HMOs on that street that could do with some investigating. So I'm concerned. You know, I'm the same as Councillor Alban. We've got a desperate need for single persons housing, but I also have all these other concerns about putting that type of housing there. In addition, it's a very small property there to actually have 4 adults living separately, because it's not a family unit, it's 4 adults living separately. And I do remember my days as a student living in multiple occupancy accommodation. What is the square footage per living accommodation for each individual? And do we think, does that reach, is there any government guidance that it's more than that or less than that?
I know Ian wishes to come back. Perhaps you could answer Councillor Wing on that as well, Ian.
Yes, so just to come back on that point, I think it's referenced in, so there isn't planning policy specifically to do with HMO sizes, but that is something that's covered by private sector housing, and it is something that was looked at in the consultation response that's in the report with regards to the size. Part of this, in terms of the standard of accommodation, and actually to pick up some of the other points that a number of councillors have made about households, I think just to make it quite clear, the premises is a household. The 4 people are living together. Whilst I appreciate what people are saying, the concern about it being that they're living as individuals, these are not individual households. They are as one household. There is a shared kitchen, there is a shared living room, there are bathrooms that are shared. Therefore, the waste collection will be for one household, and it's effectively these people living as a household in there. Now, I appreciate that everyone can recall, but potentially if they've lived in this type of accommodation before, you know, some people will keep themselves. But at the same time, in terms of when you're considering the impact of the property on the area, in terms of, for example, waste, our view is that it is not significantly different to have a material effect on bin storage happening at the front of the property, for example, over and above an existing residential property. In terms of the actual size of the rooms themselves, I think the smallest is that's allowed is 7 square meters, and these rooms are not below that smallest standard. To pick up the point about couples, it sort of falls under the remit of the planning condition. So if there is a concern that couples would be staying at the property, again, that isn't that 8 people could live there. The condition would restrict that. If there are visitors to the property, that is no different from visitors to a property on any other property on that road. There is nothing to determine that there will be more visitors to this property than there would be to any other household, because individuals are different. Individuals will have different connections and people will turn up. There's no demonstrable harm that we could attach to that in order to determine or indeed refuse the application. So I just think it's important to remember that we can look at the issues that are raised specifically by the policy, but obviously in terms of concerns about there being more people than the restriction would put in place, you know, it is not something that I believe that we would be in a position as the council to defend on appeal, over and above looking at those very specific criteria within the policy. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. And just to comment, I mean, I've touched on it before. The letters HMO always are a little bit misleading. And again, on this occasion, I feel the same. But I think if Councillor Wing is aware that there are other people living illegally in Belmont Road. Yes, I know I live over here in Margate, but I do know Belmont Road and parking is tight. Perhaps a word in the right direction to those who are breaking the law. So my thoughts. Councillor Taylor.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Keane and Councillor Wing actually did put the questions I was going to ask, but there's two other questions. One is the fire risk. Will there be more of a potential fire risk with the four people there, and what is put in place? And also on the planning issue, obviously, some of you may remember the Wyndham Avenue issue. Now, obviously, I know as obviously Livingston, I said we're on this planning application tonight, but we are in a similar situation. I think we're going to go down that road if we're not careful. I'm sure Officer Livingston will sort of repeat my worry. And at the same time, as Councillor, I can actually see where Councillor Alban is coming from. And to be honest, I don't like HMOs. I shouldn't say it, but I don't like HMOs. But at this time, I'm in a very awkward position. And this council could be put in an awkward position as well. The other question I would like to ask as well, Councillor Livingston, you mentioned about the bins, and it is an important situation because a place gets untidy if it's not drawn out properly. Will the bins actually be marked what goes in where? Because these HMOs I've seen in the past, they become a right state and they bring the area down as well. So will this be marked out? Will there be 3 bins? You haven't actually said how many bins there will be. You said a normal household, so that'd be a red bin, a blue bin, a large blue bin, and a large black bin. Would this be the actual case, please?
Thank you, Councillor Taylor. Over to Councillor. Oh, sorry, Officer.
Thank you, Chair. So just to pick up the bin storage point first. So we don't have any details of the proposed bin arrangement for the premises. As Councillor Taylor has said, it is a normal residential property, which this would be effectively classed of for the purpose of bin storage, given, again, the numbers that we're talking about. It would be the same provision that other households in that road would have. I think in terms of what we could certainly do in terms of putting an informative, so not a planning condition, but an informative on the decision notice to basically direct the applicant to the council's website, which talks about what the requirements are for bins for any property coming in. And again, if there was an issue that's caused by bins at the front of the property, then it's certainly an issue that can be raised through other channels, not though through the planning process. And I think that's the key point, is that because again this, in terms of number of people, is not over and above significantly exceeding what you could potentially have in a residential property along this road. It doesn't need specific controls on it, but again, we would certainly advise and link to that advice. On the fire safety point, it's not something that is actually covered through planning legislation, when it's actually usually covered by other means. In this instance, because it is people living in a house, there will be certain requirements in terms of the landlord and what fire safety provisions that they have to put in under separate legislation. So it's not something that we would have to make provision for within the planning permission, and it's not part of our considerations that we have to make. And just to pick up the point about Wyndham Avenue, so for some members will be familiar with this and others may not, but we have quite a lot of history with regards to HMO applications that have come to planning committee over the last probably the last 6 years, and 2 particular ones stand out. One is 14 Wyndham Avenue, which was refused in terms of the impact on noise and disturbance of neighbouring properties for an HMO in a residential street in Cliftonville, as well as on the impact on parking provision in the area. Now that was for a larger HMO, for I think it was up to 13 people was what was proposed, because it was quite a large building. That was approved on appeal, and costs were awarded against the council for the reasons for refusal that were put forward. And that included the fact that whilst parking was heavily built up, it wasn't considered both that there would be an exceedance of what an existing property of that size would lead to, but also the sustainable location in that instance and proximity to the main road in Cliftonville. As well as that, again, it wasn't considered that there was noise and disturbance over and above what you would get in a property, it's found against the council and costs awarded against us. And pretty much the same occurred with regards to Derby Arms, not too far away from this site, in fact, where again the inspector considered noise and disturbance as an issue, and it wasn't considered in that instance that the noise and disturbance for a 12-person HMO was worse than a public house, which was what at that point members did consider that it would have been. And again, we got costs awarded against us on that one. So it's very important that when looking at HMOs, all of any potential concerns are couched in the material planning considerations and on the basis of the evidence afforded, which is obviously what we've done in terms of putting forward the recommendation. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Ian. Welcome to Councillor Scott. I know a lot of people are quite busy at the moment, but thank you for coming along. I have got your point here, Councillor Wing. I'll come to you in a moment. Councillor Hart.
Thank you, Chair. So I think most of my questions have been answered, really. My concern is the number of people that are going to be living there. I know it's restricted to 4, but I know the road as well. So, I mean, I think it's a shame to lose single dwelling houses to go to an HMO in a street like that. And I think and I understand what Mr. Livingston is saying with regards to planning and how we have to adhere to the rules and guidelines. But I think it is an issue where I think we've got to try and maintain a family life. In these sort of streets, we just can't turn every house into an HMO. Although I do agree that some people need to live in an HMO. It's not a university area. It's not a general, and it's a very, as Councillor Wing said, it's a very built-up area, Ramsgate. And is it really necessary to have an HMO in a road like that? That's my concern. I am torn on this one, I must admit.
Thank you for that, Councillor Hart. If I may, I know it's very difficult, but obviously these applications, as you know, coming from whoever, and they have to be considered. But I do understand the concerns that are being stated here. Councillor Curry.
Thank you, Chair. There is a real demand for this type of household, especially in this day and age. And this HMO is certainly of a better design and development than many that I've seen. And therefore, I am of a mind to agree with the officer's recommendation. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Curry. Councillor Wing, you wish to come back?
Apologies, just trying to get the right button.
Don't worry.
You mentioned the Derby Arms, but I think that is a HMO that is managed really well, and I think it's for particular workers. So the Derby Arms, I don't believe, has a particular negative impact on that area of Ramsgate, and it is stuck down at the end. It's not on a row of houses. One of the questions I sort of came into my head as people were speaking were, we've got 4 adults living in a property that I believe will spend more time in their own rooms, which is not really a normal household setup, although young people will go to their bedrooms. Sometimes these houses are built on the cheap, and has there been any consideration about beefing up the insulation, the sound insulation to minimise some of the effect on the houses either side, because it is a terraced house, because adults can be quite noisy in their own rooms.
Ian,
I can come back on that in part, and actually it's a point actually that was raised, particularly with regards to the 14 Wyndham Avenue appeal that I mentioned. The inspector looked at the position of, in that instance, the staircase in relation to other properties, And it, as you will actually, if you bear with me, Chair, I just will present my screen, if you'll permit,
Yes.
just to show you this layout again. And I think that the key point here is that because it is a terraced property, what you have is sorry, just wait for it to load up. The staircase that will be used is going to mirror the layout next door. So it's in terms of where the chimney breasts are. So it means that in terms of where people are moving around, coming in and going out, that will be in the same. It won't be next to bedrooms on the property either side. In terms of in the actual bedrooms themselves, well, again, that comes down to the point that there's nothing to state that there will be definitely more disturbance than a family living in this property. There's nothing to determine that. That is exactly what the inspector made quite clear in the Wyndham Avenue appeal. And actually, to touch on your point, Councillor Wing, about management, it is exactly that. The question here is about management of the HMO. It's not about the principle of an HMO with 4 people, and therefore it is something that's not, that management isn't within the remit of the planning system to ensure that works. It's the principle of the use, which again, in terms of the impact of 4 people in comparison to a family house, is not significantly different to result in material harm for us in our view, in officers' view, to refuse the application on that particular policy. And there isn't anything that we can see that can be pointed to create a reason for refusal. And my concern is that whilst I appreciate councillors' concerns about this, the change that's occurring, this is something that the planning system does allow. And the agent's the statement touched on this. In other areas, this would be a permitted change. It wouldn't be an application that comes before members. And the reason, obviously, why specifically in Thanet we put the Article 4 on it was 10 years ago now, was to look at that issue of concentration, because the very specific issues that we have in Thanet with regards to proliferation of HMOs and the issues that we were having around those specific areas in Cliftonville. And that has given us a level of control, which does mean that we can, for example, restrict it down to being 4 people rather than 6. But I think there is only so far that we can go before we are trying to do something that really not only the planning system, but also inspectors will simply not allow us to do without actual evidence that there's harm. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Ian. I'm going to bring in Councillor Coleman Cook, and then I will draw a line. I think a very good debate, and I think, if I may, I know I don't come in very often as chair, but I think we have to listen to what's been said by the officer, and obviously with what's in the report about this application, possibly the implications and so forth, which has happened on, as mentioned, Wyndham Avenue. I remember the Derby Arms. I do remember it as a pub, but it did change. We refused it, and of course it did cost the council quite a bit of money via that. But I say they are my thoughts, and I chair the meeting, and I'm not trying to tell members what to do. I dream of doing that. Councillor Coleman Cook, you wanted to come in.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I'm inclined to agree with Councillor Wing, who said we are in desperate need of single people accommodation. Not everyone looking for housing is married or in a relationship. There are an awful lot of people in Thanet, single people, that need housing. And I will be supporting the officer's recommendation. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Councillor Coleman Cook. Just note here from Councillor Taylor about council tax. Does the landlord pay? I think individuals pay, I believe. I don't know if Ian, but I know I'm coming back to you a lot, Ian.
No, that's okay, Chair. I must admit, I'm not I'm not that familiar with this. I can only speak to it with regards to when I lived in an HMO about 10 years ago, and so I don't think it's particularly relevant. So I think it's probably best that I don't comment on council tax for that.
Okay. Okay, members. So I'll draw a line under that. I think we've had a good debate there and very interesting comments. So the officer's recommendation is approval. Now, I know we have a new member with us this afternoon. What I'm going to do is read your names out once again, and if you could, if you're for the motion to approve, please say so. If you're against, say against, and if you're abstaining, please say so. So if I start with Councillor Coleman Cook.
For.
Councillor Orban.
Chairman, my heart is saying, and I have got one, my heart is saying refuse, but my head is saying we would lose on appeal if we refuse, so for.
Thank you, Councillor Orban. Councillor Bayford.
For, Chair.
Councillor Curry. For. Councillor Wing.
Abstain.
Councillor Hart.
For.
Councillor Keane.
Abstain.
I don't think Councillor Patmore did arrive. Councillor Paulmore.
For.
Councillor Scott.
I will abstain on this one, Chair.
Okay, fair comment. Councillor Taylor.
Same view as Councillor Albon. For.
Thank you. Councillor Wright.
For.
And myself, I'm for as well. I will get confirmation, but I believe that has been carried. Thank you, Katie. That has been carried. That concludes the public speaking members. I will call upon Mark to read out the remaining planning applications. If a member wishes to reserve an application, please give me a shout, which I will make a note of. So I will hand over to the clerk, please. Katie?
Thank you, yes. So the remaining applications are agenda item 4B, St Peter's Presbytery, 117 Canterbury Road, Westgate-on-Sea, CT88NW, and item 4C, which is 2 Alcombe Close, Margate, CT93JP.
Thank you, Katie. Are there any members who wish to debate any of those items?
Chairman, if I can come in, I think we should debate item 4C as it's a member of council staff, and I think it would be appropriate if we didn't look at it. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, so therefore on that I will ask Ian if you could present. Can you do that?
Yes, yes, I can. Is it worth just running through the item not reserved for public speaking? Just confirm that first.
Yes, I can. Yes, I always do that. I think members realise that. So the item 4B, which is St Peter's Presbytery, I can never say the word, as you know, 117 Canterbury Road, Westgate. If that is agreed, we're not going to debate. Could I have a proposer, please?
I'll propose that, Chair.
Councillor Orban, a second, please.
Second.
Thank you. Councillor Moore. Do members agree?
Agreed.
Thank you. Thank you, members. Ian.
So I will just present my screen with regards to the Alcombe Close application. So the site is outlined here in red. So going in and looking at the property, so it's this property with the red car in front here. So the proposal is for a single-story rear extension to the property. So what you have, this is the property in the front, in the centre of the image. You have a walkway through, which goes through with the garden of the property on the left-hand side of this image. but the actual property oversails this this walkway. This is looking back towards the walkway, and you can see the main body of the property here, and the other part of the property turning to your right here. So the proposal, sorry, just give you an idea of, again, this is the view from much further back, looking towards the property down the route through. So what's proposed is effectively to fill in the sort of corner bit of the garden of number 2. So if I go back to the image, this one here, it's to put a single story extension in this area here. So going through and showing the elevation, sorry, this is the plan just showing the extent of the extension. You can see here, actually, they've just shown where the public right of way is. The green is the notation of where the extension is. So this is the rear elevation of the property. So you can see this is the Undercroft underpass bit here, and this is the window. So what will happen is there'll be an extension that will be built in this area here. It's actually behind, you can see here, it's actually on the right hand side of the image. So it's proposed to come out of the rear. This is actually showing it as a section. So this property that's here is actually set further back in the image, and I'll go back to the images just to show you that again. Again, just to clarify, so that is where the extension is going to go. It's a relatively small extension. It's flat roof in design. There are various extensions in and around the area where this property has been extended. It doesn't increase the height of a rear element over and above what you would expect from a single story extension. It's a bit of a quirk of the layout of this particular property by virtue of where it is that it even needs permission at all, because of where the highway is, because there's a public right of way through, because as you can see from the next image, it's actually it's a relatively small extension on the back of the property. But it is, it hasn't had any particular concerns raised through consultation. It's considered that it doesn't detract from the character and appearance of the area substantively, and therefore it's recommended for approval. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Ian. I move that the officer's recommendation is adopted for approval. Could I ask the Vice Chair to second, please?
I'll second that, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Coleman Cook. Do members wish to debate at all? I see no names coming up, but thank you, Councillor Auburn, for bringing that notice, as you say, is a member of the staff, and it's right to discuss. Okay, as I have no names here for speaking, once again, I'm going to come back to you. If you're in favour, I think you know this by now, for. If you're against, you're against, and if you're abstaining, please tell me. So we'll go through your names again. Councillor Coleman Cook.
For.
Councillor Auburn.
For.
Councillor Bayford.
For.
Councillor Curry. For. Councillor Wing.
For.
Councillor Hart.
For.
Councillor Keane.
For.
Councillor Paul Moore. For. Councillor Scott. For. Councillor Taylor.
For.
Councillor Wright. Councillor Wright.
For.
Myself, I'm for it as well, and now that is carried. Thank you, Katie. Members, officers, that brings this meeting to a close.